Okay, thanks everyone for joining us today. We're really excited to host this event and to see what questions you guys have for our panelists. This event's being hosted by the Gold Board. So the Gold Board stands for the Graduates of the Last Decade, which is a group of recent alumni, and we work to strengthen the relationship between the College of Engineering and Applied Science and its recent graduates. And we encourage alumni to maintain close connections with the college and university throughout their time after they've recently graduated from CU. We really enjoy hosting events like these. The reason that we sit on the Gold Board is because as recent alumni, we have thoughts and ideas about what events would be useful for our recent alumni and students to get to participate in. And this was kind of one of the exciting new initiatives that our Young Alumni Subcommittees worked hard to put together. And so they're doing this professional development series. And so I wanted to give them a big thank you for putting on all the hard work to kind of prepare this and get this ready for you. With our alumni engagement staff for putting this together and getting the Zoom links all organized and inviting you all here today. So we know that once you graduate, it's sometimes hard to think about what continuing education looks like, and that's different for different people. And so we're excited by the questions that you've submitted already and to hear what other questions you have. This series tackles and addresses different aspects of professional development, from additional certification programs through to mentoring, through to today's topic of advanced degrees. So the next events will be we have a series of events that come after this. So there'll be an event 2 weeks from today at the same time, which is focused on certificates. So that's PE, leads, technical courses, and training programs. And then another event 2 weeks after that, which is focused on mentoring, peer mentoring, and that kind of thing. And you're all, of course, invited to attend those as well. Just a little overview of what today's structure looks like. We'll hear a bit from each of the panelists in terms of what their background is and what they're doing in continued education and what their experience is. And then we'll answer some of the questions that we've prepared ahead of time, along with some of the ones that you've submitted, and then we'll move into a live question and answer. So now I'm going to move to our panelists and ask if you as our panelists can give us if you can tell us your name, give us your background, the degrees you've received, what your career trajectory is, and what you're currently doing. So Arthur, if you want to start us off just kind of by giving us a little bit of background, that'd be great.
Sure, I'll start off. Good afternoon to everybody, and thanks for the opportunity to Cameron and CU Alumni Organization. So I'm Arthur Antoine, Dr. Arthur Antoine. My last degree, I got the Construction Engineering and Management PhD at CU Boulder. I graduated from CU Boulder in fall 2017. But in summary, I'm originally from St. Lucia in the Caribbean and a civil engineer by professional trade. I got my first degree at the University of the West Indies in Trinidad and Tobago, the St. Augustine campus. Worked for British consultants throughout the Caribbean, and then did a master's in ocean engineering at Texas A&M University, and went back to civil engineering consultancies, worked for the Caribbean Development Bank for a short stint, and then finally got to CU. Right now, I work with consultants. They call Shrewsbury and Associates. We civil engineering consultants, specializing in aviation and transportation projects such as the I-70 projects and projects at the Denver International Airport. And we work nationally, but I'm based in our Denver office. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Arthur. Rachel, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hey, everybody. I'm Rachel Klein. I'm based in Boulder, but I commute occasionally to Denver. I graduated CU in 2007 with a BS in applied math, and worked for a couple years and then went back for my MBA. I went to Harvard and graduated in 2014. So a little bit about my career trajectory. As I mentioned, graduated from the engineering school 2007 at the height of financial splendor. Everything was going crazy. So I took a role in investment banking at KeyBank, and a year later, everything imploded. So I was laid off along with half my analyst class and found a role in health economics in Boston. And I kind of, through that discovery, applying math to health economics, fell in love with healthcare. It's an incredibly complex space. It's very mission driven, and there's a lot that needs to be fixed. So kind of focused during my MBA on the healthcare sector in particular, graduated, and then have had a variety of roles both on the kind of provider and payer space. And I'll get more into that throughout the questions. But currently I'm at Kaiser Permanente and I oversee Medicare for the state of Colorado.
That's great. Thanks, Rachel. Graham, do you want to finish us out?
Yep, happy to. My name is Graham Parkinson. I am currently based in Northern Colorado and Southern Wyoming. So I commute between Fort Collins and Laramie, Wyoming. The degrees I have, I earned a Bachelor's of Science in Chemical Engineering from the University of Colorado. And I earned a PhD in Material Science and Engineering from the Georgia Institute of Technology. In terms of my career trajectory, I'm working at a startup right now, and I also am interested in engineering education. And so, those are kind of the two pathways in my career that I'm interested in. And I'm trying to figure out a way where I can always be walking the line between both of those. My current position, I'm working at a startup, but it's kind of what you call, I don't know, like a stealth mode startup. So I'm not going to divulge too much about it right now, but it's a fun opportunity. I can maybe answer some more questions if anyone's really interested, but more want to focus on, talking about my experience in graduate school and stuff like that today. And I'm happy to be here and happy to take your questions.
Thanks, Graham. And thanks, Arthur, Rachel, and Graham for your time today and your insight. I know that there are some pressing questions, and the thought of graduate school can be stressful, and it's a long time commitment, and there are a lot of questions before launching off into that. So thanks for your time today. So I'll start by opening one of our questions that I think a lot of people want to ask as they start to think about graduate school, which was the time, effort, and money spent on attaining the degree worth it for what you got out at the end of the day? And I think that that's a good question for all three of you, maybe just to kind of give you a perspective on whether you think doing the graduate degree was worth it. Rachel, do you want to start?
Sure. Yes is the answer. I can unpack it, but absolutely. I think an MBA is an interesting degree because to some extent you learn common sense, right? It's kind of like, like how to lead a team or how to, manage a project and pay attention to details, and how do you think strategically. So I think to some extent, I think everything I officially learned at my MBA, I could probably have watched YouTube videos and figured it out, or read a bunch of like Harvard Business Review articles. But the reason I think an MBA is worth it is there is some hard skills that you learn, like, how to read a balance sheet, what are various accounting practices. But I mean, by and large, and I think you'll probably hear this from a variety of MBAs or just people in grad school in general, is the network. So doing an MBA program, you meet so many kind of like-minded people. It's an opportunity to kind of dive back into school, and you're a little bit more mature, you a little bit more know what you want to do. So I went back to get my MBA when I knew I was hyper-focused on healthcare. So I was able to direct my time and energy while at school there to connect with other current students who were interested in healthcare, as well as alumni of that school, as well as working professionals in the area who were doing healthcare. And there's kind of a magical 2 years when your MBA program, you can literally email anybody and everybody and say, dear so-and-so, I'm a current MBA, like business school student at blah, blah, blah. I'd love to grab a cup of coffee with you and learn more about what you do. And 80% of the time they're going to respond. And the other 20% of the time they don't respond. You just send a follow-up email and it was probably lost. So, and they'll write back. So anyway, I think the business school was a really phenomenal opportunity to deepen my network in the area that I was passionate about.
Yeah, I think that's a critical component of the school education portion as well. Arthur, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll start off with a simple yes. Rachel, it is definitely a gratifying experience to achieve the PhD as the pinnacle of your academic journey. At least for me, it was. But I think it's rewarding in multiple ways, not just financially, as a lot of people might expect, but it especially for your professional career, socially and professionally, I think it definitely brings a level of credibility and independence that could lead to different career paths from there.
Yeah, that's true. Graham, do you have anything you want to add in on that?
Yeah, I'll actually take a slightly different tone and say that financially a PhD, if you're a chemical engineer or work in material science like I do, it's not the smartest choice financially. So the people that I graduated with a BS degree with, many of them have worked for a long time, been promoted. Some of them have gone and sought master's degrees of different sorts, but financially getting a PhD in chemical engineering and material science actually doesn't really put you ahead. So, that's the one thing I just want to make sure that, it's out there, that there are some, downsides, but for me, it was worth it because as I mentioned before, I do have a desire to teach at a university level eventually, whether that's sooner or later. And so I needed that, degree in order to be able to do that. So for me, it was worth it, but just kind of blanket, the time, effort, and, the inability to plan in a PhD is another thing that I'd say, you need to make sure that you put into your equation. Whereas other advanced degrees have like a very structured format of this is how long it will take you, this is what it takes to finish. Your PhD advisor is very much in control of your situation, your committee, your department, all that, varies vastly depending on where you are. So, for me, it was definitely worth it, but I just want to make sure that, it's not always a win-win in terms of pursuing a PhD. And so just wanted to make sure that, I add the voice of reason a little bit into this panel discussion.
No, absolutely. No, so from your experience, Graham, was there a prospective job that required a PhD that you've seen your colleagues needed a PhD? And from your experience, it sounds like maybe not as much, but did you see that there were some cases where a PhD was needed?
So, I mean, as I mentioned, to work in the academic field at all, they require you to have it. And I'd say for some people that want to work in certain fields, yes. So people who want to work in technical consulting, some states, in order to be an expert witness, you have to have a PhD. So for people I know work in technical consulting, it was something that was, completely necessary. But I have seen other people that started a PhD program, decided it wasn't for them, did what we call in the PhD realm, mastered out. And by mastering out, they actually, they achieved an advanced degree, and they were actually able to realize that, the pathway that getting a PhD puts you towards is not where their heart is. And so they're actually much happier going the master's route. And so, I'd say for people that love what they're doing, like it's definitely going to continue to open doors in the right direction. But I have seen, and even in personal experience, sometimes I get doors that are kind of closed in terms of I've applied to jobs that don't really ask for a PhD. They want a bachelor's degree and they want X years of experience. And nearly every single one of those I get rejected straight away because they see, the 3 letters after my name. And so they're like, oh, well, this guy's not what we're looking for. And so, not saying that those are, my dream careers or anything, but it is something that I've seen. And so, it's not a, magic key that opens all the doors. It's, it opens doors, definitely, that's true. But and it is possible to open some of the other doors. It just then actually takes a lot of work or experience working in a job that's more aligned in those industries post PhD, which goes back to your original question, is the time component that you have to factor in. And so if you're not sure of what you want to do, that's kind of the one advice I always give people, that pursuing a PhD, if you're not sure what you want to do, is never, in my opinion, the best option. But if people, I don't want to try to scare people away. It was a great experience. It's just, I want to make sure that, rather than having this eternal optimism, I want to make sure there's some pragmatism in this discussion too.
Yeah, no, I think that's wise. I think that makes a lot of sense. Arthur, is from your experience in your field, did you find that you were overqualified for jobs that you were interested in for having a PhD?
I could definitely relate to what Graham said, and I think any one who attains a PhD who's trying to get back into industry, whichever industry might experience that. For me, the industry is construction and engineering. So in my job hunt, I wasn't even finished with grad school yet. My job hunt, looking forward, I was about to finish. I had a couple of interviews, or a few interviews. I don't know if it intimidates employers or like they see the 3 letters and they have this expectation of somebody demanding a high salary and so on, or coming in with certain demands. I got that a lot. They overqualified for the position. when I just wanted to get my foot in the door and gain more practical experience on bigger projects. But I was determined nonetheless, and slowly but surely found a few prospective employers and the one that snatched me up who will value the PhD for their internal programs and objectives and operations, especially in particular the PhD I did, all my research I did focusing on project delivery methods. So it's something I have experienced, yes.
That's I think that's so useful. Some of the advice that I sometimes give to kind of counter and balance whether PhD is worth it is to look at people who have jobs that you're interested in and look at the path that they took to get there and understand whether whatever, and clearly there are a lot of paths to get to an endpoint, right? But to understand what the breadth of paths were and how many people in those paths took PhD or took what options. And that kind of helped me calibrate. I'm actually doing my PhD right now. So that kind of helped me calibrate whether I needed mine or not. Rachel, kind of along those lines, is there anything that you wish you'd known prior to going into your MBA or once you're already in it that are along those lines of being overqualified or maybe along other lines?
Interesting. It's really interesting to hear the PhD perspective. I think anything I wish I'd known, I guess just as it relates to an MBA applying for jobs, I think I don't know that I've encountered a situation where I felt like I got turned away or I didn't get that first round interview because of the MBA. I think people view MBAs, I mean, and it's a 2-year program, kind of like it's a master's in business administration versus the PhD, which is, a bajillion years. So I think if anything, people see the MBA as like a differentiator. All of the roles I've applied for, none of them had MBA as a requirement. They all had like in the little fine print, like, graduate, like undergrad, and then, nice to have masters in healthcare administration, business administration, public health. Because so a lot of the roles I've applied for have all been like a master's is a nice to have. So it's a differentiator. I wouldn't say it's a headwind. But I mean, to Graham's point, I did take 2 years out of the workforce. So there was 2 years I wasn't making income, and it was 2 years I was actually paying tuition and rent and all that and experiences. I think MBAs are also a really great opportunity to travel around the world and meet other people from different areas. So, but I do think in retrospect, it was absolutely worth it. And if anything, it's opened more doors than closed.
That's the exciting part, right? About exploring education and opening new fields to look at. So kind of along those lines, Arthur, you got your education, then went back to work, and then got more education, then went back to work. Did you know from the get-go that you wanted to work within project management and do your PhD in that, or was there something that kind of sparked an interest early on to explore that field?
No, early on, well, between each degree, I felt I deserved a hiatus or a rest from the classroom. But no, starting off with my first degree, interest in construction, and from young, or being exposed to it from young, did civil engineering. Then I went to work, and I always had the affinity for things coastal and ocean. I'm always on the water, never hiking. I'm always diving or scuba surfing, whatever. But if I wasn't an engineer, just side funny story, I'd probably be a marine biologist. But anyway, I had this passion for coastal engineering, and that led me to pursue a scholarship. I applied for a scholarship and then got accepted, and then I got into Texas A&M at College Station. Finished that degree and did not get work in the US in coastal engineering or ocean engineering. So I went back to the consultants at the time with Halcro before CH2M acquired them, and was working throughout the region on different civil engineering projects in that role. But just during that period, after my master's, seeing a lot of the issues in project management in the, call it, developing countries, different islands of the Caribbean, it just piqued my interest to build my expertise on that and sort of look at it as a niche. So I started seeking out schools where I could pursue that. ASU was one on my list, BC in Canada, and CU definitely had a great personal touch when I reached out to the professors, and we started the conversation, and sooner or later it led to me accepting an offer to be a research assistant there. That's what led to it for me.
That's an incredible story. I love hearing the journey that got people to where they are. I think we're about the time where we maybe start to switch over to some questions from the audience, because I know that you all have pressing questions about what graduate degrees mean for you and for your specific scenario. I know that some people submitted them when you signed up for the event, so we'll get to those, but I want to answer the first one in the chat because it looks like it's been one-upped. And so kind of this idea between the impression that pursuing a PhD is a labor of love, and that you have to love it enough to get through it. And so if you're not convinced that the passion's there, and what that means about upward mobility in the field is limited without it, do you have any advice for what you should do? What if the motivation's there? What the steps are? And Maurice mentioned Graham's pragmatic input, so maybe we start with Graham and then we bounce it to the other panelists to see what their thoughts are.
Yeah, I'd say there's always going to be the opportunity to return to graduate school, but quitting graduate school is in its own, pretty traumatic experience. And so I'd say if you're not sure, given the advice that we heard a little earlier, like make sure that, you see people who are doing work that you want to do, and if they required a certain degree to get there. And so I'd say, if you're not certain, there's no harm in waiting. And even if you're at the point where you're applying, a lot of places will let you defer your admission. So if you are accepted somewhere and you still kind of feel like you're on the fence, you can always defer your admission. I mean, maybe not always. I know COVID's messed with some of that, but a lot of places will let you defer your admission too. And so you'll be able to, have that as, something on the back burner where that, all right, like, after 6 months, if you're still thinking about it, that it's the right time to kind of dive in. And while it's not encouraged in the academic world, if you start a PhD, you can, as I said, master out of it. And so that's another potential avenue to explore. Some people I mentioned, I know in graduate school, they started their PhDs, and some of them voluntarily just decided I hate this, I don't want to do this. And what we call mastered out, which you can do in two ways. You can either get a coursework master's, or you can write a master's thesis and have what we call a thesis master's. And so if you take one of those paths, you already, have achieved something. You're differentiating yourself, and that you have a graduate degree from the institution you went to in a field that interests you. But it, is a much shorter commitment in terms of years. So, officially from the academic world, they're never going to tell you to do that. But from, kind of personal recommendation, if you're not totally sure, that's another thing you can do. And some people don't actually, PhD programs are difficult in that they sometimes require you to pass, qualifiers. I had to pass the oral qualifier, written qualifier, and a certain percentage of my class, I believe around 20% of it, didn't pass those the first time. And so they were given the option to leave voluntarily, take it again. And if you, don't pass it the second time, then you're kind of involuntarily, given a pathway towards a master's degree and the way out. And so it's, there are, and you can use that to get into another PhD program if it's still the love that you have. So don't be discouraged at that point. But a lot of people realize, as you were mentioning before, with the PhD program being kind of something you really have to love and really have to be self-motivated to do, they realize, oh, like the hard research side of it isn't what is my heart and soul. And what I actually like more is kind of maybe working more on the commerce side of this industry. And so then having a master's degree in that really differentiates you and puts you on the right path. So I'm not going to discourage people if you have some inkling in your mind that you might want to do it. The practical advice that I would give is that apply and see if you get accepted, because if you do, you can always try to defer. You can always start it and realize that you want to master out. They're going to tell you that they're not going to let you do that, and some schools are putting in measures so you can't do that. But most places are going to, you're a student there, they care about you, like they get to know you, so they're going to make a pathway for you to get a graduate degree out of it. And then my other thought is that, you can also just take some time before you apply. And what I always tell people who are in their senior year of college that were thinking about going straight to a PhD, if you're not 100% certain that you want to do it, going and working is going to be the best thing you can do, because it's going to show you, do I really want to return to the lab and do a full-time research project? Or you know, do I really want to maybe kind of continue to grow my career in this way? And if you do decide you want to go back to a PhD program, you're going to be differentiated from all those people that are applying straight from a bachelor's degree because you have that extra work experience. And they love that because they can see that you're consciously making a choice to apply for making a higher salary, to make a small grad student stipend, because you really want to do this. It's not just, you know, a next step in your career. So, you know, don't want to dominate all the time. So those are the few pieces of advice that I'd give for especially along the PhD path.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of that. That's so valid. And Arthur, do you have anything you want to add to that on those thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just quickly sum up. I love that term, by the way, a labor of love. A labor of love is so accurately describes the experience. But there's so many compounding factors to making the decision as to whether or not you want to do that PhD or pursue that PhD. I feel every individual circumstance is different. But you definitely need that passion and that drive to get you through it. And every discipline is different. I could relate to mine. I know I wanted to do mine in the shortest possible time and get back to industry. That was my objective. And CU offered that. So I came in really with tunnel vision just to get it done. You really need that drive. And then I definitely want to echo something Graham said about going straight through bachelor's, master's, PhD. I mean, people do it, it's being done. I just don't recommend it. I really feel, especially more so at the PhD level, if you go work in whatever industry, you start to see what's going wrong in your industry, and then you come back to school with a more mature perspective. You can relate to the topic and even your professors on a different level. I think that experience before you do a PhD is critical.
Rachel, do you have thoughts from an MBA perspective on the question? I know it's geared towards the PhD, but maybe there's insight on the MBA side. No, there's a question specifically for you.
Yeah, the work between, some people know exactly what they want to do and they just shoulder right through, but the working between, I think, was a phenomenal experience for me. I thought I wanted to do a master's in stats, and then I worked for a couple of years and I was like, oh wait, this MBA thing sounds pretty interesting. So yeah, I think working for a couple of years kind of opens you up to possibilities that perhaps you didn't appreciate.
Yeah, I think that's so true in terms of being able to kind of benchmark on the industry, as Arthur said. Julie wanted to know if, because the MBA experience is so like a big part of its networking, what's your thoughts on doing that in the remote environment?
Okay, great question. I kind of have two thoughts on it. I guess one is, why are you getting an MBA? I mean, I think there are some really good concrete subjects that you can learn and get from an MBA. You know, organization management and the financials and the accounting and all that. So there's absolutely real content you can learn from MBA. So I guess you would ask yourself, one, why are you going for the MBA? Is there real content that you're hoping to master because you're explicitly looking to move more towards like a general management, maybe be an entrepreneur type thing? But I would say whatever, a remote program could work, but I would make sure to investigate what are the opportunities for networking. I've heard of really phenomenal remote programs, some based in the UK or Spain, where you know, every Wednesday night you do something, and then all day Saturday you do something, and it's all remote work. People are reading case studies, But then twice a year, or maybe once a year, everybody flies into a particular area and then have like week-long workshops. So I think a program like that works because you are touching the other people in your program so heavily, even though you're maybe not in person. You still have the frequent remote touch bases and then the, you know, occasional in-person sessions. So I think in that context it works. But if it's a purely remote MBA with limited interaction with the other students, with kind of no in-person, I mean, I would be, it really, that one would depend on your personal situation and why you're considering the degree. But it kind of depends on you, and I would do a lot of research in the program and understand what are the touch points that it offers.
Yeah, no, I didn't know that was an option where they had people fly in and do weeks together. That's awesome.
There's some really cool international MBA programs like that.
That's incredible. Wow. So one more question along the MBA line is, and I don't know if you can help answer this, but if it's a help for not like nonprofit organizational work.
Ooh, I love this question. So I'm actually at a nonprofit. Kaiser's a nonprofit. So the answer is an MBA can be applied everywhere, and I've actually worked in for-profit, publicly traded. So I've worked at CVS and Anthem, and then I've worked for the government. I work for the state of Massachusetts Medicaid agency called Mass Health. And now I'm in a not-for-profit, Kaiser Permanente. So I think the MBA teaches you core skills around strategy, leadership, organizational management, and not-for-profit governments still need to make ends meet, right? Like you still need to understand, of this dollar, where am I spending it? And am I being judicious with the taxpayer dollars or with the nonprofit dollars? It's just a slightly different mindset. Instead of reporting to the street or reporting to the stock market every quarter, here's our earnings, you're reporting to the taxpayer, hey, this is how effectively we're spending your money, or you're reporting to the board of the nonprofit, this is how effectively we're spending your money. So I think an MBA is absolutely helpful in all arenas, and there are at historic levels more and more MBAs going into nonprofit and government work. And it's really exciting because I think the MBA background gives you kind of a sense for strategy, organization, leadership, et cetera, and like structure that perhaps some of those arenas have lacked in the past.
I love that idea of just splitting the dollar differently over the nonprofit. That's not something that I thought about before. I think we have about time for 2 more questions. So I'll do one PhD focused one, and then maybe one kind of more broad general one for all 3 of our panelists to kind of wrap up on. One of the questions submitted in the registration was any tips for finding an advisor that would be a good fit in the PhD program, and what you should be looking for when thinking about a program in general. So maybe Graham, do you want to start us off with any advice you have in that arena?
Yeah, sure. So the main advice I give you is look at the students that the person currently is advising, because that's exactly what your life is going to be. Lots of time people come into PhD programs and they're kind of bright-eyed and optimistic, and they think, oh, well, all these other students are working on Saturday, but I'm just going to work really hard Monday through Friday, and I'm going to be able to take the weekends off. And it's the thing I always say is every other person that's in that PhD program was admitted to the same thing, had the same bar that they were able to clear. And so, that's the biggest advice I can give. Look at how the students that person's advising are, living their life. How much are they working? Are they happy? What's their interaction with each other? What's their interaction with their advisor? Because, basically that's going to be your life. In very, very rare circumstances, that's not going to be the case, but in 95% of the situations, their current students are going to be, very similar to exactly how you are. And so, the other advice I give is preferentiate the personal interaction that you'd have with your advisor over the research subject. Time and time again, people I meet, they went to do research on what they loved more than anything in the world. And then they just had a very big personal mismatch with their PhD advisor, and that led to them switching groups or mastering out. And so I'd say, prioritize how well you get along with the person over, the content that you're going to be researching, because at the end of the day, it is going to just be work. And that, even if you're working on something that is exactly what you want, you're going to have to work on stuff that's not exactly there. If the overall umbrella is the field that you're really interested, I think that, you're going to still find ways to incorporate, the little things you really love within that group. But, that's the biggest advice that I can give is, look at how the current students are, and then, prioritize your relationship with the person over what their group does research on. Because as I said, at the end of the day, it's not, a structured program that says like, you'll be done in this many years. It's really up to how productive your advisor can make you, how well you can make yourself work in the lab, and then also how well you get along with your committee. And if your advisor is, seeing you as a shining star, your committee is gonna, see very much what they see.
Yeah, Yeah. Arthur, any kind of final thoughts on that question?
Yeah, definitely getting to observe the advisors, current students would be valuable. I think it's a unique. I remember a few occasions while I was a grad student, um, we had some US-based prospective PhD students visit CU Boulder, and they spend more time with us in our grad office, touring the campus and stuff like that, just to get to know the environment and what would be expected of them. I think a couple of them actually signed up and probably finished their PhD right now. I know one finished his PhD. But anyway, I think getting to know the advisor is critical too, and doing, say, call it your research on that advisor. My experience on it, especially being based overseas at the time, I was reaching out to, with each school, I had 4 schools in mind. With each school, I reached out to the advisor directly, by email, of course, introduction. And to me, just responsiveness and interaction was a big deal. I mean, you could go on their website and see what kind of research they're working on right now. You could see all this online content on their students. But again, I say, out of all the schools, CU, my advisor, the first professor I initiated a great conversation with didn't even end up being my advisor. Then my advisor got on board at CU Boulder, but they were definitely responsive and personal and set up Skype meetings just to talk and get to know each other, stuff like that. That that led me to lean towards CU to pursue that degree with my specific advisor.
Yeah, that's, I think, so crucial. So maybe as our last question, 30 seconds, because I think most people here probably are interested in this panel because they're thinking about graduate school. And so maybe in 30 seconds, you can give advice as you applied for, or you were thinking about getting into graduate school. Any advice you wish you could have given to yourself, or you would give to people who are now currently thinking about their next steps in graduate school. And if that's like the actual process of applying, or what it can afford you, or people to reach out to, kind of from your process, what do you, if you could redo it, what's some advice for people that are looking to go into it? Rachel, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Take the GMAT or GRE or LSAT or whatever it is seriously. I did one like I took one when I was just a senior at CU, and I didn't really study. I just kind of took it, and I did okay. I did fine, but to really get into kind of the higher caliber programs, you really need to knock it out of the park. So the next round, I had a very rigorous study program for myself. I had 4 months where I spent at least 3 hours a day, an hour in the morning, 2 hours in the evening. And I went through like each section. I took those study books. I took a whole bunch of sample tests. I like timed myself. So whatever, I did really well after my intense study program, which honestly wasn't that fun, but it's only 3 months, and it kind of set me up for like a, you know, kind of where I wanted to go. So it was worth it in retrospect. I did take one day on a weekend off from this studying. So anyway, that rigorous approaching the standardized test with just that level of like, this is a job, I'm gonna do really well. It really does show results. And then the other thing is for MBAs, they're really big on essays. So I wrote a ton of I wrote so many essays, and I had everybody I knew review them, and I some folks who I knew who went to business school review them. And I probably turned those essays like 100 times. So really take the application criteria seriously, and really gear up. If application deadline is September 1st, kind of wind the clock backwards and be like, I got to start this in March, like between the studying for the standardized test and the essays, like, you know, take that stuff seriously, is my advice.
Yeah, no, I think that's really true. Arthur, do you have thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I think I'll just say preparation is key. For me, it happened all in a bit of a hurry. I was late to get to Boulder to start the program. I was closing a contract on my previous job. And the biggest, to me, each time, even from doing the master's and then doing the PhD, it's just that first semester was a tough transition, coming from industry each time and coming from overseas back into the classroom, that structured homework assignments and that setting. So I think most of when I did the PhD, I remember one professor in particular, I skipped, I didn't skip, but I just totally blanked out and forgot some of her assignments. And she was like, what's going on? And like, I just totally forgot I had this simple assignment to do. But yeah, the transition period, at least for me coming from industry, 9 to 5, working every day, and then getting back into the classroom setting, I think you could, if you have the time, prepare yourself for that. Get to the, if you're accepted to the program, get there early and settle down.
Graham, any final thoughts on that question?
I guess just the one other thing is that I didn't apply to, I kind of tiered where I was going to apply. I applied to like, better ranked schools, a little bit lower. And, I ended up getting into my top choice, which was Georgia Tech, where I ended up going in material science. And so the one kind of advice I give myself is that I wish I'd applied, I'm very happy where I ended up going. It's exactly where I wanted to go. But I guess the other thing is that I didn't apply to these other top ranked programs because I was given the impression like, oh, you probably won't get in. So only really apply to one. And so I guess that's the other, piece of advice I haven't heard that I would give is that, you can't find out if you don't apply. And so, the one advice I would give to myself as, someone applying to graduate school was that maybe I could have applied to a couple more places, and just rolled the dice and seen. Not that I really know if I would have chosen anywhere else, but it's one thing that I didn't do that I kind of wish I had done, but I don't really have any regrets about it.
Yeah, no, I think that that's really important. It's hard to, when you on the outlook, to know what programs you can get into from the start. Such a hard thing to kind of predict. So thank you, panelists, for that fantastic insight across that huge range of questions. That's been so insightful. We wanted to leave 15 minutes for some breakout sessions, and we know that the Zoom platform can get a little fatiguing if just having a panel talk at you. So we wanted to give an opportunity to kind of get to chat with some of our panelists. So Cameron's going to send us into breakout rooms here and hopefully have some panelists in each breakout room that you can chat with and just give you an opportunity to chat with each other. So we'll then come back together just for a quick kind of wrap up thank yous and to remind you of the next sessions in the series that we have going on. So if you could stick around just for the end, we'll thank you for coming. But that's kind of the next 15 minutes is these breakout rooms.